The hopeless obese woman finds a stray cat. But what this cat does changes everything. What secret does a simple stray cat hold that could completely change a heartbroken widow's life? Just when you think you know where Evelyn and Smokey's heartwarming story is going, a shocking twist involving a shattering heirloom reveals an act of loyalty so profound it will leave you breathless. Subscribe, like, and listen now to uncover the incredible truth in Smokey's garden where hope grows. The pain hit like a sledgehammer to the chest, sharp crushing, stealing her breath. Evelyn gasped, a strangled wheeze clutching at the thin fabric of her nightgown. The remote clattered from her numb fingers onto the worn carpet. Her vision swam, the flickering images on the television screen blurring into streaks of garish color. She tried to call out, but only a faint groan escaped. The floor rushed up to meet her, the impact jarring against her cheekbone, the musty smell of old wool filling her nostrils. This is it. She thought, a wave of icy panic washing over the pain alone. Her hand spasmed, reaching instinctively towards the end table where the cordless phone sat just inches away but miles beyond her grasp. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Dimly, she was aware of movement near the dormant fireplace. Smokey, her cat. He'd been curled on the hearthrug, a small gray shadow against the brick. Now he was a presence beside her, then a blur leaping onto the end table, his small weight surprisingly steady. His blue eyes, usually soft, seemed to gleam with an unnerving intensity in the dim light filtering from the television. He nudged the phone with his head. Nothing. He nudged it again, harder. Still useless. Evelyn's consciousness was fading, the crushing weight on her chest becoming unbearable. Then Smokey shifted his attention. He moved deliberately towards the edge of the table, towards the tall porcelain vase, white with delicate blue flowers, a relic from her wedding registry decades ago. He lowered his head, placing his furry shoulder against its smooth side. He pushed. Evelyn watched, detached, as if viewing the scene from afar. The vase tilted, teetered for a heart-stopping second on the brink, and then plummeted. The sound, when it came, was deafening in the stillness of the house. A sharp, explosive shatter that ripped through the night, echoing long after the fragments skittered across the hardwood floor. Then silence broken only by Evelyn's ragged, fading breaths and the low, urgent meow vibrating from Smokey's chest as he peered down at her from the table's edge. Before Smokey, before the shattering vase, Evelyn Carter's world had shrunk to the four walls of her small clapboard house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Columbus, Ohio. At 65, she was a widow. Robert gone 5 years now from a sudden heart attack that had felt like the amputation of her own soul. The house, once filled with the cheerful chaos of a life lived fully, now felt cavernous and suffocating, thick with dust motes dancing in the infrequent sunlight that pierced the drawn blinds. Every surface held a memory, a painful reminder of the vibrant woman she used to be, the energetic elementary school teacher whose laughter echoed in the halls, the wife who gardened alongside her husband, their hands touching as they pulled weeds. Now Evelyn was a prisoner in her own body. Tipping the scales at over 300 pounds, simple tasks were monumental efforts. Climbing the stairs to her bedroom left her breathless and trembling. Bending to tie her shoes was an exercise in frustration often abandoned for slip-on footwear. Washing dishes required leaning heavily against the counter, her back screaming in protest. She lived primarily downstairs, sleeping fitfully on the sagging living room sofa. Her reflection was a stranger, puffy, sad-eyed, swallowed by layers of flesh and loose-fitting clothes ordered online. Shame was a constant companion, whispering insidious criticisms whenever she caught a glimpse of herself in a window pane or the dark screen of the television. She rarely left the house. Trips to the grocery store were agonizing ordeals navigated with a motorized cart. Her eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding the pitying or judgmental glances she imagined from other shoppers. Neighbors, like kind old Harold next door who always waved, were met with a brief nod before she retreated back inside. Friendships forged over decades had withered, neglected under the weight of her depression and self-imposed isolation. Her diet consisted mostly of delivery pizzas, microwave meals, and sugary snacks. Consumed mindlessly in front of the TV, the temporary comfort doing little to fill the aching void left by Robert's absence and her own lost vitality. Her days bled together in a monotonous cycle of waking late channel surfing, eating, and dozing. The house held the stale scent of inactivity and microwave dinners. Dust layered the framed photos of a younger, happier Evelyn and Robert. The backyard, once their shared pride, was overgrown, the flower beds choked with weeds, the bird feeder empty and tilting. Her former life, the one where she molded young minds and shared loving companionship, felt like a dream belonging to someone else. Despair had settled deep in her bones, a heavy, suffocating blanket. She was adrift, waiting not for rescue, but simply for the end, existing in a gray twilight of loneliness and regret. The silence of the house was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the drone of the television, a constant low thrum, mirroring the numb emptiness within her. Harold might occasionally knock to offer help with the trash cans, his concern palpable, but easily deflected by Evelyn's practiced weary dismissals. She was anchored to her grief and her physical limitations, seeing no way out and lacking the energy or the will to even look for one. The rain started mid-afternoon, a typically dreary Ohio autumn downpour that drummed relentlessly against the roof and windows, deepening the gloom inside the house. Evelyn was settled on the sofa, half watching a game show, a bag of chips open on the cushion beside her. Then she heard it, a faint, intermittent scratching sound, almost lost beneath the rhythm of the rain. It seemed to come from the front porch. Curiosity, a long dormant emotion, flickered briefly. She ignored it at first, turning up the volume on the TV, but the scratching persisted, accompanied now by a thin, pathetic mewling sound. Annoyance warred with a pang of something else, empathy. With a heavy sigh that turned into a grunt of effort, Evelyn pushed herself upright. The room tilted slightly as she caught her balance. She shuffled towards the front window, peering through a gap in the dusty blinds. There, huddled in the driest corner of the porch, pressed against the siding, was a miserable scrap of a cat. It was painfully thin. Its gray fur matted and darkened by the rain. It shivered violently, its large, startlingly blue eyes wide with hunger and fear. It looked utterly wretched, a portrait of abandonment. Evelyn's breath caught. Something about its sheer vulnerability resonated with her own sense of helplessness. For years, she had shut herself off, refusing connection, nursing her own misery. But looking at this desolate creature, a flicker of her old self, the nurturer, the teacher who couldn't bear to see suffering, surfaced. She hesitated. Taking in a stray was complicated. Vet bills, food responsibility. She could barely manage herself. But the cat let out another weak cry, and the decision made itself. Moving slowly, deliberately, Evelyn made her way to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator, bypassing her usual soda, and poured a little milk into a shallow bowl. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the front door, the damp, cool air hitting her face. The cat flinched, pressing itself harder against the house, ready to bolt. "It's okay." Evelyn murmured, her voice rough from disuse. "It's okay, little one." She placed the bowl down carefully a few feet away from the cat, then slowly retreated back inside, leaving the door cracked open just enough to watch. The cat remained frozen for a long moment, then, driven by desperation, it crept forward. It sniffed the milk hesitantly, then began to lap its tiny pink tongue, working quickly. It drank until the bowl was empty, then looked up, its blue eyes meeting Evelyn's through the crack in the door. It didn't run. It simply sat, looking less terrified, perhaps even grateful. Evelyn felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, an unfamiliar sensation. She opened the door wider. "You can come in just till the rain stops," she offered softly. The cat didn't move immediately, but after a few minutes, it cautiously stepped over the threshold into the dim hallway. It shook itself, sending droplets of water onto the worn runner, then looked around, taking in the strange new environment. Evelyn closed the door. The cat eventually found its way into the living room, and after inspecting the dusty fireplace, curled up on the old threadbare rug in front of it, as if claiming sanctuary. Evelyn watched it settle, a small knot of conflicting emotions tightening inside her. She hadn't intended to keep it, but as the rain continued to fall outside and the little gray cat slept peacefully by her hearth, a silent pact seemed to form. She decided to call him Smokey, after his fur color. Caring for Smokey became her immediate simple goal: provide food, water, and shelter from the storm. It was the first purposeful action she had taken for something outside herself in years, a tiny disruption in the crushing stasis of her life. Smokey didn't leave when the rain stopped. He adopted Evelyn and her quiet, dusty house with the quiet determination of a creature who had found a safe harbor. His presence began subtly altering the rhythm of Evelyn's days. The most immediate change was the morning routine. Used to sleeping late, often until noon, Evelyn found herself rudely awakened around 7:00 a.m. by insistent, loud meows emanating from her bedside. Smokey would sit there staring intently, demanding breakfast. Initially, Evelyn grumbled, pulling the covers over her head, but Smokey was persistent, sometimes adding a gentle paw pat to her cheek for emphasis. Grudgingly, she would heave herself off the sofa. She had migrated back there to sleep, shuffle to the kitchen, fill his bowl, and then, finding herself awake and upright, would sometimes stay there drinking a glass of water instead of immediately retreating back to the cushions. This simple act of getting up, moving from one room to another first thing in the morning, was more activity than she was used to. It was a small start forced upon her by a small furry tyrant. Smokey explored the house thoroughly, his initial timidity replaced by a quiet confidence. He'd nap in sunbeams, bat at dust bunnies, and occasionally follow Evelyn from room to room, a silent gray shadow. One brighter afternoon, weeks after his arrival, Evelyn was sitting by the window, watching the drizzle return, when Smokey suddenly sprang to life. He trotted purposefully to the back door, tail held high like a flag, and looked back at her, meowing expectantly. "What is it, boy?" Evelyn asked, more curious than annoyed. He meowed again, scratching lightly at the door. Sighing, she levered herself up and opened it. Smokey darted out into the damp, overgrown backyard. He stopped a few yards away, looked back, and meowed again. An invitation, intrigued and needing to bring him back in eventually anyway. Evelyn stepped outside. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. She hadn't ventured further than the porch in months. Picking her way carefully over uneven flagstones slick with moss, she followed Smokey's lead. He trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back, leading her towards a far neglected corner of the yard, almost hidden behind overgrown rose bushes. She was breathing heavily by the time she reached it, leaning against the weathered fence to catch her breath. And then she saw them poking through the tangle of weeds were tiny, resilient yellow flowers, chrysanthemums. She realized with a jolt they were struggling, but alive. Suddenly, memory surged vivid and sharp. She and Robert, 20 years younger, laughing as they planted these very mums, their hands covered in dirt, planning the future in this small patch of earth, the unexpected flood of remembrance, of warmth, of love, of shared dreams, now buried under years of neglect and grief, overwhelmed her. Tears welled hot and stinging, rolling down her cheeks. She hadn't cried like this, with such raw pain mixed with sweetness in years. As she stood there weeping silently, Smokey, who had been sniffing curiously at the flowers, seemed to sense her distress. He rubbed against her legs, winding around her ankles, purring loudly, a comforting rumble in the quiet yard. He looked up at her, his blue eyes soft. In that moment, something shifted within Evelyn. It wasn't just about the past, it was about the present, about this small creature offering unconditional comfort, about the flicker of life persisting in the neglected garden. It was a wake-up call. She started small. Inspired by that moment in the garden, she began taking Smokey for walks around the yard each day, weather permitting. At first, it was just a few hesitant steps, her joints protesting. But Smokey trotted patiently beside her, sometimes darting ahead to chase a leaf, making the chore feel less like exercise and more like companionship. She started making conscious food choices, replacing one sugary soda a day with water, adding a simple salad to her usual delivered meal, choosing fruit instead of cookies for a snack. She found some old exercise DVDs, gentle stretching chair yoga, and tried doing them for 10 minutes at a time. Smokey often perched on a nearby chair, watching with apparent feline supervision. Progress was slow, measured in ounces rather than pounds at first, but after a couple of months, her clothes felt slightly looser. Climbing the stairs didn't leave her quite so winded. One morning, stepping on the scale she usually avoided, she saw she had lost nearly 30 pounds. It was a revelation. Around the same time, Harold's wife Mary stopped her as she was retrieving her mail. "Evelyn, dear, you're looking brighter, getting some sun." The compliment, unexpected and genuine, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the weak autumn sun. She mumbled a thank you, but inside she knew it wasn't the sun. It was the routine, the small changes, the quiet encouragement of a stray cat who had led her back to a forgotten corner of her own life. The bond between them deepened. Smokey wasn't just a pet, he was her confidant, her furry little motivator. Winter arrived, blanketing Columbus in snow and ice. Evelyn, while still significantly overweight, felt marginally better than she had in years. She had lost close to 40 pounds now, and the daily walks with Smokey, now brief dashes into the snowy yard, and her gentle exercises were becoming habit. She even occasionally exchanged pleasantries with Mary over the fence. One frigid January night, a biting wind rattling the old window panes, Evelyn was settled on her sofa, a thick Afghan pulled over her legs, watching an old movie. Smokey was curled in his usual spot on the hearth rug, basking in the imaginary warmth of the long unused fireplace. Suddenly, the familiar opening notes of the movie score were drowned out by an intense pressure building in Evelyn's chest. It wasn't indigestion. This was different, terrifyingly familiar from the day Robert collapsed. A sharp, vice-like pain radiated down her left arm, stealing her breath. She gasped, clutching her chest, the remote tumbling unnoticed to the floor. Panic seized her. No, not now, not like this. She tried to push herself up to reach the phone on the end table, but her limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Her vision blurred, the edges darkening. She slumped sideways against the armrest, then slid onto the floor, landing heavily on her side. The musty smell of the carpet filled her nostrils. She could hear Smokey meowing a distressed, urgent sound. Through a haze of pain and fear, she saw him leap onto the end table. He nudged the phone just as she'd seen him do playfully before, but it didn't move far enough. His meows grew more frantic. He looked from the phone to her, then to the tall porcelain vase, the wedding gift, standing precariously close to the edge. His blue eyes seemed to fix on it with an almost calculated intensity. He braced himself and pushed. The shattering crash echoed the sound she remembered from her hook, only this time she was fully conscious of its cause and potential consequence. The noise sliced through the quiet suburban night like a gunshot. Evelyn closed her eyes, the pain unrelenting, vaguely aware of Smokey jumping down and nudging her face, purring frantically now. Minutes later, or perhaps seconds, time had lost meaning. There was pounding on the front door. "Evelyn! Evelyn, are you all right? I heard a crash." It was Harold's voice, laced with concern. He must have heard the vase break. Hope flickered faintly. She tried to call out, but only managed a weak groan. The pounding grew more insistent. Then the sound of the door being forced open. Harold rushed in his face, paling as he saw her on the floor. "Mary, call 911. He yelled back towards his own house, already kneeling beside Evelyn, checking her pulse. The rest was a blur. Paramedics, flashing lights, the siren's wail. The sterile efficiency of the emergency room. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness. When she finally awoke properly, it was in a quiet hospital room, monitors beeping softly beside her. A kind-faced doctor stood by her bed. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "you've had a mild heart attack. You're very lucky." He explained the situation, the blockage, the treatment. Then he added something that made her breath catch. "Your recent weight loss played a significant role. You know, losing even 40 pounds reduced the strain on your heart considerably. It likely made the attack less severe and significantly improved your chances of recovery. If this had happened 6 months ago," he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Later that day, Harold arrived carrying a familiar cat carrier. He let Smokey out, and the little gray cat immediately jumped onto the bed, nudging Evelyn's hand and purring thunderously. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she weakly stroked his soft fur. "You saved me, Smokey," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You broke the vase," Harold heard. The realization hit her fully. The cat, her little stray, had not only motivated her first steps towards health, but had actively saved her life. The doctor's words echoed. Her own efforts had mattered, had given her this second chance, but it was Smokey's quick thinking, his desperate act, that had summoned help. This wasn't just about losing weight anymore. This was about reclaiming her life, a life she now owed in large part to a homeless cat who had wandered onto her porch. Lying there, weak but alive, Evelyn felt a profound shift. There was no going back to the resigned despair. She had to live truly live for herself, for Robert's memory, and for the small, purring hero on her bed. Recovery took time. Evelyn spent several days in the hospital, followed by weeks of mandatory rest at home. Mary and Harold were constants, bringing meals, checking in daily, handling grocery runs. Mary even cleaned up the shattered vase fragments, quietly disposing of the painful reminder, though Evelyn kept one small blue-flowered shard tucked away in a drawer, a memento of her unlikely rescue. Smokey rarely left her side, sleeping curled on the foot of her bed or purring on her lap as she rested on the sofa. His presence was a constant comforting weight. The heart attack, terrifying as it was, acted as a powerful catalyst. Lying in her hospital bed, listening to the doctor explain how her initial weight loss had literally saved her life, Evelyn felt a surge of determination she hadn't experienced in decades. The vague intention to get healthier solidified into a non-negotiable commitment. This wasn't just about looking better or moving easier. It was about survival, about honoring the second chance she'd been given. As soon as she was cleared for gentle activity, Evelyn approached her health with renewed vigor, but also with more structure. She scheduled an appointment with a nutritionist recommended by her doctor, learning about portion control, balanced meals, and healthier cooking methods. The deliveries of greasy pizza and processed foods stopped entirely. Her kitchen, once dormant, saw more activity as she experimented with simple, wholesome recipes: baked fish, steamed vegetables, hearty soups. She discovered she actually enjoyed cooking again, the simple rhythm of chopping vegetables, oddly therapeutic. She joined a Silver Sneakers fitness program at the local community center, starting with water aerobics, which was easier on her joints. Being around other seniors all working towards their own health goals chipped away at her ingrained self-consciousness. She made tentative conversation, discovering shared interests and rediscovering dormant social skills. The isolation began to recede, replaced by cautious connection. The weight continued to come off steadily now. She passed the 50-pound mark, then 75. Her movements became noticeably easier. She could climb the stairs without feeling like she'd run a marathon. She started taking longer walks with Smokey, exploring streets in her neighborhood she hadn't seen in years, noticing the changing seasons, the blooming flowers in other people's yards. Smokey, her faithful companion, trotted alongside her, his presence a constant encouragement. Her relationship with Smokey deepened beyond measure. She talked to him constantly, recounting her day, sharing her thoughts, her fears, her small victories. He would listen, or seem to, blinking slowly occasionally, offering a soft meow or a head nuzzle. She knew rationally that he was just a cat, but emotionally he was her partner in this journey, her furry guardian angel. She pampered him with better quality food, a new scratching post, and endless affection, recognizing the profound debt she owed him. Harold and Mary remained steadfast friends, celebrating her progress, offering encouragement without ever being intrusive. Evelyn found herself looking forward to their chats over the fence, sharing recipes with Mary. discussing lawn care with Harold. She even reconnected with an old colleague from her teaching days after bumping into her at the community center, agreeing to meet for coffee, a significant step outside her comfort zone. The house began to feel different, too. Evelyn started cleaning, really cleaning, dusting the photos of Robert, not with sadness, but with a sense of purpose. She opened the blinds, letting sunlight stream in. The air felt lighter, fresher. She hadn't reached her ultimate goal yet, still having significant weight to lose, but she was firmly on the path. The despair that had once defined her existence was replaced by a quiet, growing hope. She was no longer just reacting to life. She was actively participating in it again, regrouping after her health scare, armed with new knowledge, growing confidence, and the unwavering support of her friends and her extraordinary cat. Months melted into a year, then nearly two. Evelyn's transformation was remarkable. She had shed over 100 pounds, her body finding a new, healthier equilibrium. While still considered overweight, she was active, mobile, and radiated a vitality that astonished those who knew her before her involvement at the community center expanded. She volunteered to help organize events, her past teaching skills proving surprisingly useful. Her circle of friends widened, built on shared activities and genuine connection. Life had settled into a comfortable, positive rhythm. Evelyn felt stronger mentally and physically than she had in decades. Then came the night that tested her newfound peace. She was asleep upstairs in her actual bedroom now. Smokey curled on the pillow beside her head, as he often did. A faint scraping sound from downstairs roused her from a deep sleep. She lay still, heart suddenly pounding, straining her ears. It wasn't the wind, it sounded like a window being pried open. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her old vulnerabilities, resurfaced. An older woman living alone, easy target. She fumbled for the bedside lamp, her hand shaking, but before she could switch it on, Smokey bolted upright. His ears swiveled, his body tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Then, with a surge of protective fury, he launched himself off the bed and streaked out of the room down the stairs. Evelyn heard his furious yowling erupt downstairs, followed by a startled male yelp, a crash of something heavy, maybe the coffee table, and then the distinct sound of the back door banging open and frantic footsteps receding into the night. Adrenaline surged through Evelyn. Her fear was momentarily eclipsed by disbelief and fierce pride in her small defender. Hands still trembling, she switched on the lamp, grabbed the phone, and dialed 911, her voice shaky but clear as she reported the attempted burglary. The police arrived quickly. They found the ground floor window forced open, muddy footprints on the carpet, and the coffee table overturned. Outside near the back door, they found a few drops of blood on the porch steps. "Looks like your cat gave him something to remember you by," one of the officers remarked, examining the scene. "Probably scared him off good." They took her statement, dusted for prints, and assured her they would patrol the area more frequently. After the police left, the adrenaline drained away, leaving Evelyn shaken but profoundly grateful. She searched the house for Smokey. Calling his name, she found him huddled under the kitchen table, favoring his front leg. When he limped towards her, rubbing against her ankles, she saw that his paw was swollen. The next morning, worry gnawed at her. She carefully got Smokey into his carrier, a feat in itself, as he clearly associated it with unpleasant vet visits, and drove him to the animal hospital. The vet examined him gently. "Well, Evelyn," Dr. Ramirez said after taking some x-rays, "Smokey here is quite the little fighter. He has a hairline fracture in one of the bones in his paw. Probably landed hard when he launched his attack." She explained he'd need cage rest and pain medication, but should heal fully. As Evelyn sat in the waiting room, Smokey resting sedated in his carrier, the events of the previous night replayed in her mind. Smokey hadn't just saved her from a heart attack. He had physically defended her, injuring himself in the process. Looking at the other anxious pet owners, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection and responsibility, not just for Smokey, but for vulnerable creatures like him. He had been astray, alone, and frightened, just like she had been, in her own way. He had saved her, and now she felt a powerful urge to pay that kindness forward. The idea sparked bright and clear. She could help other strays. Not a huge shelter, but her home, her yard. It was safe, welcoming. She could take in one or two at a time, work with local rescues, offer a temporary haven. It felt right, a natural extension of her own journey back to life, fueled by the courage of her small gray cat. When she brought Smokey home, settling him into a comfortable recovery space, she looked around her bright, clean living room. It was no longer just her house. It would become a place of refuge, a testament to the cat who had shown her the way back to hope. She decided on the first name for her future rescues, inspired by the place where her own change began. Daisy. 2 years to the month after Smokey first appeared on her porch, Evelyn stood in her backyard, bathed in the warm glow of a late summer afternoon. She was nearly 120 pounds lighter, moving with an ease she hadn't known since her youth. Her face, thinner now, was alight with a serene confidence. The yard, once a neglected tangle, was transformed. Colorful flower beds bloomed. The grass was neatly trimmed and strategically placed. Cat trees and shelters dotted the landscape. Today was special, the first small adoption event for Smokey's Haven, as she'd decided to call her modest home rescue 3 cats. Daisy, a calico rescued from behind the supermarket. Violet, a shy tabby found shivering under a car, and Poppy, a boisterous ginger kitten, were interacting playfully with a few carefully vetted potential adopters inside a large enclosed patio area. Harold was manning a small table with lemonade and flyers about responsible pet ownership. While Mary chatted warmly with visitors, Evelyn moved among the guests, sharing the stories of the cats, answering questions, her voice calm and assured. She spoke easily about her own transformation, not dwelling on the darkness, but emphasizing the healing power of companionship and second chances. There was no grand confrontation, no final battle against an external foe. The climax was this: Evelyn fully inhabiting her reclaimed life, facilitating connection, creating hope for others, both human and feline. Smokey, his limp barely noticeable now, unless he ran too fast, sat perched on the railing of the porch like a furry sentinel, observing the proceedings with regal calm. He was the undisputed king of the haven, tolerant of the temporary feline residents, but clearly devoted only to Evelyn. At one point, Evelyn paused, looking across the yard. Her gaze met Smokey's blue eyes. He blinked slowly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a recognition of the journey they had shared, from shared desolation to this moment of quiet triumph and purpose. A sense of profound peace settled over Evelyn. She had faced her own demons, grief, depression, ill health, and emerged not just healed, but stronger, using her experience to bring light to others. This, she realized, was her victory. The adoption event was a quiet success. Violet, the shy tabby, found a home with a gentle older couple who understood her need for patience. Daisy and Poppy would stay a bit longer, but Evelyn felt confident the right homes were out there. As the last visitors left, and Harold and Mary helped tidy up a comfortable quiet settled over the yard, Evelyn's life had found its new normal. Smokey's Haven became a small but respected part of the local animal rescue network. She typically fostered 2 or 3 cats at a time, specializing in seniors or those needing quiet recuperation, pouring her nurturing energy into helping them heal and find permanent homes. Her house, once silent and dusty, was now filled with the soft patting of paws, gentle meows, and the comforting rhythm of caregiving. She remained active at the community center and her church, often sharing her story and Smokey's as a testament to resilience. The tale of the overweight widow saved by a stray cat became a beloved local anecdote occasionally mentioned in the community newsletter or neighborhood blogs, inspiring others facing their own struggles. Near the patch of rejuvenated chrysanthemums in the corner of her yard, Evelyn installed a small hand-painted wooden sign, "Smokey's Garden Where Hope Grows." It served as a quiet tribute to the cat who started it all and the place where her own hope was rekindled. Most evenings ended the same way. Evelyn would settle into her comfortable armchair, a book or knitting in her lap, considerably smaller. Now Smokey would inevitably jump up circle once and settle onto her lap, his purr a steady, soothing vibration against her. She would stroke his soft gray fur, look out at her peaceful garden, and feel a deep, abiding gratitude. The crushing weight she carried for so long wasn't just physical pounds. It was grief, loneliness, and despair. Now replaced by a sense of purpose and connection, she felt lighter in spirit than she had in decades. Her life hadn't just been saved by a stray cat. It had been utterly, beautifully transformed. And as Smokey purred contentedly in her lap, Evelyn knew she wouldn't trade her second chance for anything. The old cat waited on the pier for 15 years. When the woman realized who he was waiting for, she broke down. The town of Port Blossom, Maine, clung stubbornly to the rocky coastline, a place where the tang of salt and seaweed was a permanent resident in the air. Its houses, painted in shades faded by sun and spray, huddled together as if for warmth against the often fierce Atlantic winds. Life here ebbed and flowed with the tides and the fishing seasons. It was a town of routines, of familiar faces, and of stories whispered like the sigh of the waves against the shore. One of the town's most steadfast yet enigmatic fixtures was an orange tabby cat. No one quite knew where he'd come from, or when exactly he'd started his vigil. But every single day, as reliable as the setting sun that painted the harbor in hues of gold and rose, he would appear on the old weathered timbers of the main fishing wharf. He'd pad silently, almost reverently, to the very end, near the furthest salt-encrusted piling, and settle down. He wasn't looking for scraps, though sometimes a kind soul returning from a day at sea might toss him a piece of bait fish, which he'd accept with quiet dignity. He wasn't seeking attention, though occasionally a tourist might try to coax him closer, efforts he usually met with indifferent stillness. His attention was fixed entirely outward, his gaze directed across the vast, shifting expanse of the ocean, toward the blurred line where the deep blue water met the endless sky. He sat with an unwavering intensity, a small furry sentinel lost in a silent, ceaseless watch. The locals had long since grown accustomed to him. They called him Rusty, a name that suited his slightly faded ginger coat, tinged here and there with the gray of age, much like the weathered paint on the lobster boats bobbing nearby. Old Silas, who'd been mending nets on this wharf longer than most residents had been alive, would sometimes nod towards the cat and mutter, "Still waitin', eh, Rusty? Loyal fella." Martha, who ran the harborside diner, the Salty Spoon, always put out a small bowl of water and leftover fish scraps near the back door, knowing Rusty would find them when his vigil allowed. Children, with their unfiltered curiosity, would sometimes ask their parents why the orange cat always sat there. The answers were usually vague shrugs. "He just does, honey. Maybe he likes watching the boats. He's waiting for his ship to come in," some would joke, though the humor always felt a little thin, a little sad. The truth was, no one really knew. He was simply Rusty, the watcher on the wharf, a silent thread woven into the fabric of Port Blossom's daily life, his lonely presence as familiar and unquestioned as the cry of the gulls or the clang of the buoy bell out in the channel. Years had passed like this. Seasons turned, nor'easters raged, blanketing the wharf in snow and ice, yet somehow Rusty would still be there, perhaps sheltering momentarily under a stack of lobster traps before resuming his post. Summer heat shimmered off the water, but his gaze remained steady. Tourists came and went, marveling briefly at the picturesque town and its stoic feline resident, but Rusty paid them no mind. His world seemed confined to that small patch of weathered wood and the infinite horizon beyond. He waited with a quiet patience only animals and deep, unwavering hope seemed to possess, for something or someone that never seemed to arrive. Into this settled rhythm stepped Eleanor Vance. She arrived not on a bustling ferry packed with summer tourists, but in a sensible sedan, dust clinging to its sides from a long drive up the coast. She wasn't here for the quaint charm or the lobster rolls. She was here on the somber errand of closure. Her parents had passed away within months of each other the previous winter, and the task of sorting through a lifetime of accumulated belongings in their quiet suburban home hundreds of miles away had unearthed ghosts she hadn't confronted in years. Among them were faded photographs, old letters, and trinkets that spoke of a life before, a life connected to this very town, Port Blossom. It had been nearly 15 years since she'd last set foot here. 15 years since the storm, the frantic calls, the crushing silence, and the hurried, grief-stricken departure of her family. Her older brother Ethan, the laughing, vibrant fisherman who smelled of salt and engine oil and knew the sea like the back of his hand, had been lost during that terrible nor'easter. The sea he loved had claimed him, his boat found splintered and empty days later. The grief had shattered her parents, and Port Blossom, once a place of happy summer visits, became a landscape of unbearable pain. They had moved away, seeking solace in anonymity, leaving the ocean and its haunting memories behind. Now Eleanor walked the familiar yet changed streets with a heavy heart. The air, thick with the scent of the sea, both comforted and wounded her. She recognized the facade of the Salty Spoon, the spire of the small white church, the weathered sign of the marine supply store. It was all achingly familiar, yet overlaid with a patina of time and loss. She was staying at the town's only inn, a slightly threadbare but welcoming place, planning to visit the small cemetery where a simple stone memorialized Ethan, his body never recovered, and perhaps speak to some of the older fishermen, though she wasn't sure what she hoped to gain. It was late afternoon on her second day. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the harbor. Drawn by an instinct she didn't fully understand, Eleanor found herself wandering towards the main wharf. The sounds were the same. The creak of mooring lines, the squawk of gulls fighting over a discarded morsel, the gentle lap of water against the pilings. And then she saw him. At the far end of the pier, silhouetted against the reddening sky, sat an orange cat. He was older now. She could tell even from a distance. His posture had the stillness of age, his fur perhaps a little less vibrant than she remembered. But the way he sat, the unwavering focus of his gaze locked on the horizon, it sent a jolt, sharp and unexpected, through her. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It couldn't be, could it? So many years had passed. Cats didn't live that long, did they? Especially not strays exposed to the harsh coastal elements. It was just another orange cat, she told herself sternly. Port Blossom probably had dozens of them, drawn by the fish scraps from the boats. Yet she couldn't look away. There was something in his posture, a profound loneliness mixed with an unshakable sense of purpose that resonated deep within her own weary heart. She remembered another orange cat, a scruffy, affectionate stray kitten Ethan had found sheltering under his boat one blustery spring day years and years ago. A kitten he'd named, what was it? Something silly, something nautical. Barnacle, that was it, because he'd clung so tightly. Ethan had loved that cat, often letting him ride on the boat during calm days close to shore. Could this possibly be Barnacle, grown old, weathered by time and grief, still waiting for the boat that would never return? The idea seemed absurd, a fantasy born of her own longing and the melancholic atmosphere of the place. Still, her feet began to move, slowly, hesitantly, carrying her down the length of the wharf towards the solitary figure. The closer Eleanor got, the more her heart hammered against her ribs. The cat didn't turn, didn't flinch. His attention remained fixed on the vast, darkening sea, as if her approach was merely another insignificant ripple in the background of his long vigil. She could see him more clearly now, the slight thickening around his middle, the few nicks in his ears that spoke of past skirmishes, the way his fur, though clean, seemed permanently ruffled by the wind. He looked undeniably old, a veteran of countless seasons spent on this exposed pier. She stopped a few feet away, her shadow stretching towards him in the fading light. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sigh of the wind. The cat's ear twitched slightly, the only acknowledgement of her presence. His gaze didn't waver from the horizon. Eleanor crouched down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle him. She could see the steady rise and fall of his furry sides as he breathed the salt air. He emanated a strange sense of peace, but it was the peace of resignation, not contentment. Looking at him, so steadfast in his lonely watch, a wave of profound sadness washed over her. Whether this was Ethan's cat or not, his silent devotion was heartbreaking. Then her eyes caught something around his neck. It wasn't just ruffled fur. There was a thin, dark band partially hidden beneath his chin. A collar. It looked ancient, made of leather cracked and darkened by time, salt, and weather. It seemed fused to his fur, almost a part of him. Her breath hitched. Ethan's cat, Barnacle, had worn a collar, a simple leather one her brother had made himself. With trembling fingers, Eleanor reached out slowly, murmuring soft, soothing sounds. "It's okay, fella. It's okay. Just want to see." To her surprise, the cat didn't bolt or hiss. He remained perfectly still, perhaps sensing the lack of threat, or perhaps simply too weary to care. Her fingers gently brushed against the fur, then touched the worn leather. It was stiff and rough. She carefully tried to shift it, her heart pounding so loudly she felt sure he could hear it. There was something attached to the collar, something small and metallic, dulled by years of exposure, a tag. It was corroded and barely legible. Eleanor leaned closer, squinting in the dimming light, her fingers gently rubbing away a layer of grime and salt. Faint letters began to emerge, etched deeply into the metal. Protected from the worst of the elements was a name, ETHAN, and beneath it a phone number, an old area code, long disconnected from the house they had fled in their grief. A strangled sob escaped Eleanor's lips. Tears welled hot and fast, blurring the name, blurring the cat, blurring the whole world. It was him. It was Barnacle, Ethan's Barnacle, left behind 15 years ago, and still here, still waiting. The carefully constructed composure Eleanor had maintained since arriving in Port Blossom shattered. The grief she thought she had managed, compartmentalized, rushed back with the force of a rogue wave. It wasn't just grief for Ethan anymore. It was grief for this small, loyal creature who had kept faith when everyone else, including herself, had moved on. Grief for the lost years, for the loneliness he must have endured, for the love that bound him so fiercely to a memory. She sank down onto the rough wooden planks of the wharf, heedless of the splinters or the dampness, and wept. She wept for her brother, whose laughter she could almost hear on the wind. She wept for her parents, whose sorrow had driven them away. And she wept for this old orange cat, who had become a living monument to love and loss, standing his lonely watch year after patient, forgotten by almost everyone, almost. The sound of Eleanor's quiet sobbing finally broke through the cat's concentration. He turned his head slowly, his gaze shifting from the distant horizon to the crying woman beside him. His green eyes, slightly clouded with age but still intelligent, regarded her steadily. There was no fear in them, only a quiet curiosity, perhaps a flicker of recognition deep within. Eleanor choked back her tears, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing not just an old stray, but a tangible link to her lost brother, a furry vessel holding 15 years of unwavering loyalty. "Barnacle?" she whispered, the name feeling rusty and unfamiliar on her tongue after so long. "Is it really you?" At the sound of the name, the cat's ears perked forward more decisively. He blinked slowly, then let out a soft, questioning meow, a sound rough with disuse like a creaky hinge. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor held out her hand, palm open, keeping it low to the ground. She didn't try to touch him immediately, just offered her presence. "It's me, Barnacle," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "It's Eleanor, Ethan's sister. Do you remember?" He stared at her hand, then back at her face, his whiskers twitching as he sniffed the air. Perhaps some faint, long-buried scent memory stirred. Perhaps it was the soft tone of her voice, so different from the brusque calls of fishermen or the fleeting attention of tourists. Or perhaps in the way animals sometimes seem to understand things beyond human comprehension, he sensed the connection, the shared history, the deep well of sorrow and affection directed solely at him. Slowly, tentatively, Barnacle took a step towards her, then another. He stretched his neck forward and cautiously sniffed her outstretched fingers. Eleanor held her breath, tears silently tracking down her cheeks again. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he pressed his forehead gently against her hand, a low, rumbling purr starting deep in his chest. It was a rusty, intermittent sound, as if the mechanism hadn't been used in years, but it was undeniably a purr. Overwhelmed, Eleanor let out another soft sob, this time mingled with relief and a fragile tendering of hope. She carefully stroked his head, her fingers sinking into the surprisingly soft fur beneath the weathered outer coat. He leaned into the touch, closing his eyes briefly. "Oh, Barnacle," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. We shouldn't have left you. We were just so broken." The memory of that chaotic departure flooded back. The frantic packing, the tear-blurred goodbyes to neighbors, the desperate need to escape the town that held Ethan's ghost around every corner. In the whirlwind of grief, Barnacle had been overlooked. He'd always been semi-independent, often disappearing for hours, sometimes days, exploring the docks and surrounding woods. They had called for him vaguely, distractedly, but when he hadn't appeared as the car was being loaded, no one had the emotional energy to mount a proper search. Perhaps they'd assumed he'd be fine, that someone would take him in. Perhaps, in their pain, they simply couldn't bear to take another piece of Ethan with them, only to be reminded daily of their loss. Eleanor, just a teenager then, had been swept along by her parents' overwhelming sorrow. The guilt washed over her now, sharp and cold. Barnacle, seemingly content with the contact, rubbed his cheek against her knee, then surprised her by attempting a clumsy leap into her lap. He was heavier and less agile than he might once have been, but he landed with a soft thump, circled once, and settled down, tucking his paws beneath him. His purr grew a little stronger, a steadfast rumble against her legs. Just then, a figure approached them down the wharf. It was Martha, the owner of the Salty Spoon, carrying a small steaming bucket. "Evening, Rusty," she called out cheerfully, then stopped short, seeing Eleanor, with the cat nestled comfortably in her lap. "Oh, well, hello there. Didn't see you at first. Seems Rusty's finally made a friend." Eleanor looked up, managing a watery smile. "Hello? Is Rusty his name now?" "Aye, that's what folks call him," Martha said, setting the bucket down. It contained fish scraps, still warm. Been calling him that for years. Faithful old thing, isn't he? Always watching? She looked at Eleanor more closely. You're not from around here, are you? Though you look familiar somehow. I used to visit a long time ago, Eleanor explained, stroking Barnacle's back. My brother was Ethan Miller, the fisherman. Martha's friendly expression softened instantly with recognition and sympathy. Oh, dear Lord, Ethan's sister? Yes, I see the resemblance now. Ethan, heavens, that was a terrible time. Such a loss for the town. He was a good man. Her gaze dropped to the cat in Eleanor's lap. And this old fella? Wait a minute. Ethan had an orange cat, didn't he? A little scrapper he called Barnacle? Eleanor nodded, tears pricking her eyes again. This is him. I just found his old tag. Martha started, her mouth slightly open. Well, I'll be, she breathed. All these years, we all just figured he was a stray who took a liking to the pier. He survived all right, mind you, tough as old boots. Folks leave him bits, and I give him his supper most nights, but still waiting for Ethan? The question hung in the air, heavy with sadness. I think so, Eleanor whispered, burying her face briefly in Barnacle's warm fur. He didn't flinch, just continued his rumbling purr. Martha shook her head slowly, a mixture of sorrow and wonder in her eyes. 15 years. That's something else. She looked from the cat to Eleanor, sensing the deep connection reforged across the gulf of time and loss. Well, she said softly, looks like his wait might finally be over. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep indigos, Eleanor sat on the cooling wharf planks with Barnacle still nestled heavily in her lap. Martha had quietly left the bucket of fish scraps nearby and retreated to her diner, leaving them to their reunion. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a fleeting emotional encounter, it was a responsibility, a promise resurrected from the ashes of grief. She couldn't leave him here again. The thought was unbearable. Having found him, having felt the warmth of his aging body and the rumble of his long dormant purr, abandoning him to his lonely vigil was unthinkable. It would be a betrayal not only of Barnacle, but of Ethan's memory. But taking him home, that was a different proposition altogether. She lived in a quiet apartment in a city hours away. She worked full-time. Barnacle was old, ancient really, for a cat who had lived outdoors for so long. He would need veterinary care, patience, adjustment. He had known nothing but the freedom of the docks, the rhythm of the tides, the vastness of the sea for 15 years. Could he adapt to life indoors? Would he even want to? She looked down at him. He had stirred and was now delicately picking at the fish scraps Martha had left, eating with the focused appetite of an animal, used to making the most of every meal. He seemed content, trusting, having accepted her presence completely. His trust felt like a heavy weight, a sacred duty. "What do you think, Barnacle?" she murmured, stroking his back as he ate. "Think you could trade this view for a comfy sofa and a window overlooking a city street?" He paused his eating and looked up at her, blinking slowly as if considering the question. He then gave a little headbutt against her hand before returning to his fish. Eleanor knew what she had to do. The logistics were daunting, but not insurmountable. She would extend her stay at the inn. First thing tomorrow, she would try to find a local vet to give him a checkup, get him vaccinated, and make sure he was healthy enough for travel. She'd need to buy a carrier, food, a litter box, all the paraphernalia of cat ownership she hadn't thought about in decades. She thought about her apartment. It was quiet, perhaps too quiet sometimes. Maybe an old purring companion was exactly what she needed. A living link to her past, yes, but also a companion for her future. Someone to care for, someone to greet her at the door, even if his greeting was just a slow blink from a comfortable cushion. That evening, back in her room at the inn, having gently coaxed a reluctant barnacle into a cardboard box lined with a towel for the short trip from the wharf, the reality felt both overwhelming and profoundly right. Barnacle, after nervously exploring every corner of the small room, sniffing suspiciously at the unfamiliar furniture, eventually curled up on the end of the bed and fell into a deep, twitching sleep. Watching him, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just about rescuing a cat. It was about healing a piece of her own fractured past, about honoring her brother's memory in a tangible way. The next morning, finding a vet in Port Blossom proved easier than expected. Dr. Hanson, a kind, middle-aged woman with gentle hands, listened patiently to the incredible story. She examined Barnacle thoroughly, marveling at his condition. "He's remarkably healthy for his age and history," she declared, estimating him to be around 16 or 17 years old. "Tough old Maine Coon mix, probably. Strong constitution. He's got some arthritis, his teeth have seen better days, and he could stand to gain a little weight steadily, but no major issues." She administered vaccinations, treated him for fleas and worms, and microchipped him to Eleanor. "He's been waiting a long time," Dr. Hanson said softly, as she gave Barnacle a final scratch behind the ears. "He deserves a comfortable retirement, armed with medication for his arthritis, special senior cat food, a sturdy carrier, and other supplies from the surprisingly well-stocked general store." Eleanor felt ready. She spent the next couple of days letting Barnacle adjust to her presence more fully, keeping him safely in the inn room. He seemed to adapt quickly, enjoying the regular meals, the soft bed, and the gentle attention, though he often sat at the window, staring out with that familiar, distant look in his eyes. Eleanor knew leaving the only home he'd known for 15 years wouldn't be easy for him, no matter how comfortable his new life might be. She owed him one last visit to his post. On the evening before they were scheduled to leave Port Blossom, Eleanor carried Barnacle, nestled securely in his new carrier, back down to the main wharf. The air was cool and carried the clean scent of the incoming tide. The harbor was quieting down, the last of the day boats secured, their crews heading home. Eleanor walked slowly to the end of the pier, to the familiar spot near the salt-encrusted piling. She opened the carrier door, but didn't force him out. After a moment's hesitation, Barnacle cautiously stepped onto the weathered planks. He sniffed the air, his whiskers twitching, taking in the familiar scents and sounds of his long-time domain. Then he turned and looked out at the sea. The sun was setting again, a fiery ball sinking into the vast Atlantic, mirroring the scene from countless evenings past. The water shimmered with gold and pink reflections. A light breeze ruffled Barnacle's fur. He stood perfectly still, his silhouette framed against the dramatic sky, the steadfast sentinel resuming his post one final time. Eleanor watched him, her heart full. She didn't interrupt him. This was his ritual, his connection to the past. To Ethan, he needed this moment. He stood there for a long time, gazing out at the horizon where the sea met the sky, as if searching for something he knew perhaps, deep down, would never appear. Then something shifted. He lowered his gaze from the horizon and looked up directly at the wide open sky above. A lone seagull cried out overhead, circling lazily on the breeze. Barnacle watched it for a moment, then let out a single, soft meow. It wasn't the questioning sound he'd made when she first spoke his name, nor the plaintive cry of a lonely animal. It sounded different, resolute, like an acknowledgement, or perhaps a farewell. He then turned away from the sea decisively and walked back towards Eleanor. He rubbed against her ankles, winding between her legs, his purr starting up again, that rusty, precious rumble. He looked up at her, blinking slowly as if to say, "Okay, I'm ready." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but this time they were tears of release, of profound, bittersweet relief. It felt as though, in that final look at the sea and the sky, Barnacle had finally understood. He had waited, faithfully, loyally, for 15 long years. He had kept his vigil, but now something had changed. His person, or at least a part of his person's family, someone who knew his name and held his history, had come back. He wasn't alone anymore. The wait was over. He could finally leave his post. Eleanor carefully scooped the old cat into her arms, holding him close. He felt solid, warm, real. "You waited long enough, old friend," she whispered into his fur. "It's time to come home." He didn't struggle as she placed him gently back into the carrier. He settled down, turning to watch her through the mesh door. The drive away from Port Blossom the next morning was poignant. Eleanor glanced back at the receding harbor, the familiar wharf shrinking in the distance. She felt a pang of sadness for the town, for the memories it held, but it was overlaid with a quiet joy, a sense of peace she hadn't expected. Beside her, in his carrier, Barnacle was quiet, occasionally letting out a soft meow, but seemingly calm. When they finally arrived at Eleanor's apartment hours later, she carried him inside, her heart full of hope and a touch of apprehension. She set the carrier down in the quiet living room and opened the door. Barnacle stepped out cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar air, his old eyes taking in the new surroundings. He explored slowly, his paws silent on the rug, his tail held low but not tucked in fear. Eleanor had set up a soft bed for him near a sunny window, along with his food and water bowls and a litter box tucked away in a quiet corner. After a thorough investigation of his new domain, Barnacle walked over to the window, hopped onto the cushioned sill with surprising agility, and looked out. He wasn't looking at a vast ocean horizon anymore, but at a city street, trees lining the sidewalk, people walking by. He watched for a while, then turned, curled up on the cushion, tucked his nose under his tail, and began to purr. Eleanor knelt beside him, gently stroking his back. The steady, rhythmic rumble filled the quiet apartment. He was no longer the lonely sentinel on the wharf, staring out at an empty sea. He was home. He had waited, and he had been found. And after 15 long years, Barnacle, the faithful watcher of Port Blossom, was finally at peace, no longer alone.